how does sales volume compare over the last year? Despite there being so few properties on the market for sale, how can we actually use this median house price data? It's readily available and it's a good guide as to what's happening in a suburb region of the state. The fastest selling suburbs, when we look through the top 10 of those, they're virtually all way under the median house price. They're down the bottom end of the market.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management, sales and buyers agency servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here's your host, Jared Mann.
Welcome to one of my favourite types of episodes that I do on Perth Property Insider. And today I'm running through the best and worst price performers and rental yields over the 23-24 financial year. Not only that, I'm going to be going into how I interpret data and how we feed all of that in to inform our purchases on our buyer's agency side, ensuring that we're buying something with the most strongly predicted growth over the next year, as well as good historical growth, and also choosing areas that are, I guess, undervalued and representing the most upside. So got a lot to cover today. Let's jump into it, shall we? Before I do, I wanted to mention that majority of this data and insights are sourced from Rewa, who do a fabulous job with their data, and wouldn't put this together without them. So, haven't the whole of Australia woken up to growth being the reality in Perth, with us being, one of the top performer over the last year? When we look at the median house price, it's changed from 560 to 668 now. It's increased by an impressive 19.2%. So the growth that we've been seeing for the last 2 to 3 years is actually showing up in the median house price now. And that is causing many buyers, both investors and home buyers all around Australia, to wake up to the opportunity that Perth presents. And we've still got plenty of growth ahead as far as I can see. I've covered that off in the previous episodes from different angles. So check out my Perth property market update and also my analysis episode on affordability, which gives us great insight that there should be, strong growth ahead over the next 2 to 3 years. Now, getting back to today's app, the median unit sale price has increased 11.3% over the last year, reaching 445, and that's just 5,000 below the previous record for median unit price of 450. So units are still representing fabulous value, and we're seeing a lot more activity and growth starting over on units as affordability's, becoming more of a factor and people are getting pushed out of houses. And when we actually look deeper at how individual suburbs have performed, keep in mind I'm just been talking about the median house and median unit price changes. When we look deeper at how the suburbs have performed, we realize that there's not just one market, but there's hundreds of markets around Perth. And many of these have exceeded the growth in the median unit and house price. And so that really highlights to me the importance of good suburb selection and just how much difference we can make for our clients on our buyer's agency side. So very important to be choosing the right suburbs and maximizing your growth, not just over the next year, but over the future of owning the property. So how does sales volume compare over the last year? Despite there being so few properties on the market for sale, we've got just 1,946 houses at the moment. The total number of sales for the year has actually been very high at 54,307, being the preliminary settled houses, units and land for the year. And the REBA data is showing that it's going to likely exceed the previous financial year. So despite all the media showing, how tight the market is and there being so few properties, because properties are selling so quickly and turning over so fast, we've actually had a very high sales volume. So don't be disheartened. There are opportunities. There are many sellers selling. It is hard to compete with so few properties being available and so many buyers vying for them. And so that's another reason to consider using a buyer's agent, because we lend on all of our relationships and we pounce on stuff as soon as it comes on, and we get access to a lot of off-market properties as well, so we're not competing as much. So what is a median house price? And I just want to quickly touch on a few core concepts, because you can hear me flash around these words and not always know what they mean, and it's always good to get back and remind ourselves how useful and what are the uses for when we look at this data. So median house price is that half the properties have sold above that price and half below. And where do we find this data? Well, it can be found on the REWA website in the insights area. It can be found on the CoreLogic website, and realestate.com, I believe, feeds through a lot of CoreLogic data. And there's many other sites now that you can make use of. I use Suburbs Finder, I use HTag, so they're really good for deeper analysis as well. And the high-level sort of median price data is often used by commentators and the media to distort and really it's very misguiding to the public, because they take these high-level headlines and don't really go any deeper to look at, what's underpinning them. So just be careful with these high-level headlines. Now, how can the median house price actually be distorted? So if there's been a whole lot of new housing created, that's going to push up the median house price and make it appear like, the average property in that area is grown by a lot more than it actually has. And with buyers seeking out affordable housing, there's also a lot more activity in the lower price points of any individual suburb and also across the whole of the Perth market. So that drags the overall median house price, potentially down, because remember, it's half properties are selling below and half the properties are selling above. So especially in tightly held areas, it can not be truly reflective of what's happening to the individual houses within those. And the other way that median house price can be distorted is that in older areas, many homes are substantially renovated, they're extended. These increases to the value that have been manufactured, if you will, isn't always a true reflection of what's happened to the average property within the area. So when they're, coming up and being, resold, doesn't always indicate what's truly happening. How else can they be distorted? Well, finally, you've got to be careful that you're looking at data that has enough sales volume. So it needs to be statistically reliable. And I think that I prefer to look at, at least suburbs with at least 50 sales over the last year. And the more, the better, to be more statistically reliable. So these factors and others will determine how closely the median house and the unit prices reflect the typical price changes in any given area. So how can we actually use this median house price data? It's readily available and it's a good guide as to what's happening in a suburb, region and state. And changes to this median house price should not necessarily be relied on when you're looking at shorter time periods, especially when you look at quarterly or even yearly, which is why I prefer to look over longer term trends. And I'm more interested in the trend in the median house price, not as much what's happened in the last quarter. And I prefer longer time periods. So you may have heard me say previously that I had a special study done by REWA to compile 30-year average annual growth rates. And that was as far back as we could reliably get data. And that's otherwise not available to the public, but is part of our research when we're selecting suburbs to buy for our clients. And typically you can get the 10 and 20-year median price average data, which is available from REWA and CoreLogic. So I believe REWA has 10-year and CoreLogic, I believe, has 20-year. So the longer you look back, the more sort of growth cycles you can encompass, and that gives you a better feeling for what's historically happened to a suburb. Doesn't always mean that it's going to happen in the future. So that's why we also look at things like mean reversion. So that is where we look at and compare the 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and 10 year data with either the 20 or 30 year data to see what has recently underperformed compared to its historical longer term growth rates. So those kind of those suburbs then might be due for a catch up or a reversion to that long term average. And I especially like to look at the 10-year average annual growth rates as a good measure for how suburbs compare for value. And I compare them to the 20 and 30-year averages, and I focus on buying in areas where there's the most potential upside. And that's where the 10-year average growth has not been too high yet. So very helpful when we're looking over these longer time periods and comparing relative value. Now, the other way we can look at relative value is look at the median house price of other suburbs around a particular suburb and see, once buyers start getting priced out at one, the growth and demand from those buyers will ripple over to the neighbouring suburbs. And there's merit to thinking that if one suburb's had a big jump in prices and big change in its median house price, buyers will then look to the surrounding suburbs, and that's how price growth ripples. So another useful way that we can use median price data. Now, what I don't think you should necessarily be doing, and it's certainly better than throwing darts at a board, but it's what a lot of investors do, is they chase the recent increases. I don't necessarily think that you should be doing that. Investors specifically seek out to buy in suburbs that have had the highest median house price change either over the last year or over the last 5 years. And I think that this recent growth will continue to be the case. By doing this, you can be very sure that you're buying in a suburb that's hot, but you need to consider how much longer that growth potential is going to continue and how it has the suburb, performed over the longer term, because it might just have a spurt and be coming off the boil at its spurt, and it could then sit low and do nothing for the next 10 years. So that's not necessarily the way you want to choose suburbs. Now, let's dive into some of the data and my observations for each. And first of all, I'm going to cover off the top 10 suburbs for growth. In all of these data sets, I'm not going to be able to go and mention every suburb, and because I'm going to be quickly mentioning them, a lot of this could skip over your head. So I do have an accompanying report, which I'll make available on the show notes, and you can click to download that and grab yourself a copy so that you can look at it all. And I've also written up my guidance notes and some of the things that I cover in this episode. So when we actually look at this list, we've got Vivash as the number one suburb with a change of 40.9%, and it's currently got an annual median selling days of 7 days, very tight area. Then got Hillman at 537,000 median with 39.5% change, very tight average selling days of 5 days. Armadale at 460, so it's had a huge amount of growth at 39.4%. Midvale at 515, it's had 38.3%. And it's really encouraging when I look through some of these that we've bought in for clients over the last 12, 18 months, and they're sitting on huge gains with what they've had. And then we've got the only two suburbs that were above the much higher price points, and that was Shelley at 1.269 mil, it's had 38%, and Callaroo at 1.220 mil, it's had 37.1%. And interestingly, the average selling days in each of those is 15 days and 14 days. So still taking a bit longer to sell at those higher price points. And we round out the top 10 with Kelmscott, now at 503,000 median and 35.3% change over the last year, 8 days, average selling days. Henley Brook at 735. So that was the only other one that's above the median house price at the moment, had 35.2% and 9 days, average selling days now. And then we've got Lockridge at 513,000 and Haynes at 605. Haynes is on the back of Armadale, if you don't know where that is. So the fastest selling suburbs, when we look through the top 10 of those, they're virtually all way under the median house price. They're down the bottom end of the market. I'll mention the top 3 with Coolunga at just 5 days, Leader at 5 days, Hillman at 5 days, and Aurelia, I'll mention the 4th at 5 days because that's all the fastest selling suburbs in the state for houses. Notice that the majority of those top 4 are all around Rockingham and Kwinana. So that's notable that those areas are still on fire and both investors and buyers are being attracted there because they're still relatively low median house prices and, you know, people are trying to get out of renting and trying to not overextend themselves with interest rates still being relatively high. So what are some of my observations? Affordability definitely remains the focus. And we had, 7 of the top 10 all being below the median house price for Perth and only 2 being above a mil. So definitely the lower end of the market has been where all the action has been, where the majority of the action is anyway. And we saw that houses have been selling very quickly with the overall median for Perth getting down to a record of 8 days, which was set in October and November last year. And the most affordable suburbs on the list have had median time on market that is nearly half of the suburbs with a median over $1 million. So properties are basically selling half as quickly in the affordable end of the market. And affordability has definitely also come to the fore with the fastest selling list, and all 10 suburbs were below the median house price. So in essence, affordability has driven this list, and I expect over the next year that we're going to move. This list is going to very much change to the middle priced suburbs as the cycle moves through. And I've provided deeper analysis and commentary on that in various other episodes, but I wouldn't be surprised when I come to you next year if we've got a lot higher median house prices, and you have to think that the median price suburbs are looking very affordable compared to these lower end suburbs that have jumped up by so much. So now let's jump into the top 10 suburbs for median unit price growth. And I really want to go a bit deeper into units than I have done in previous years when I do this analysis, because I'm certainly seeing that they're a great affordable option for those that do have a more limited budget and want to get themselves into the market. And I'm all for, buying a well-placed unit that can certainly set you up to have good growth in the next few years. So top area for growth over the last year, it was Cottesloe, and it's got a median unit price of 1.2 and it's had 50.9%. Now, you have to look at that and say, all right, that seems very distorted. I believe that's because there's been some new projects released down there that have really skewed that. And so I'm not really paying as much attention to that change. I'm sure its actual underlying growth in the old units has still been very decent, so notable. But then when we go further down the list, Bayswater with the median unit price of 350s had 44%. Look, you'd expect that to have had some catch up because it did, it was just seeming so affordable for how close it is to Perth. Then we've had some other areas like Girraween with 34%, Rockingham with 30.7%, Shoalwater with 30%, Mount Hawthorn 28.6%. Go down the list then to find Glendalough 26%, Armadale 25%, Morley 24%, and Erskine 24.7%. So The fastest selling unit suburbs, and I'll go through the top three. Mount Hawthorn had the fastest selling units at just 6 days. Bit of a higher median unit price there as well at 627. Belgar with 7 days. Inglewood with 7. So check out the report, full list of 10. But the observations is that 7 of the suburbs in the top 10 for units have a median house price below the median unit price. So affordability is also driving this list of top 10 too. And the overall demand for property, in particular, the strong motivation to exit the challenging rental market, has seen demand for units increase lately. And it's definitely going to also feature a lot more strongly, I feel, next year in what's going to happen to the growth ahead for units. And we did hit a new record for median time on market at just 9 days for Perth in the year in February. So the average selling time's really tightening up for units as well. Now, let's go into our top 10 suburbs for rental yield. And the reason I like to also cover this off is when the yield starts to get very high, it's also another factor that you have to think is going to revert, and what's going to happen to revert the yield to more longer term levels is that a lot of investors will be attracted in by that, and that's going to result indirectly in prices going up, yields decreasing, and good growth in those areas. It's not always the only indicator. You really need to couple that with all the other factors, but it's got a strong correlation that when rental yield increases, it's likely going to be more attractive to investors and see pressure on prices increasing and reverting back that yield. Doesn't always happen in that, next year, but over the next 2 to 3 years, you'll see some correction and reversion and price pressure to increase. So the top 10 suburbs for rental yield for houses, what I'm probably going to do here is not mention all of them, but Langford topped the list with a median house rent of $600, and it had a yield of 6.1%, very solid. We've then got Brookdale with a yield of 6%, median house price of $473, rental return of $550 per week. Cannington, we've got a yield of 6% with $492 median house price, $565 per week rent. And then we've got other areas such as Medina, Armidale, Belgar, all sort of sitting at that 5.8, 5.9% rental yield. East Cannington, Queen's Park, Camillo, and Nollamara. Very little difference between all of those. The rental yields are 5.7, 5.8 for those last 3 or 4 that I mentioned. And when we look to units, this is another strong indicator that units are so undervalued. Rental yields are significantly higher. We've got Cannington topping the list with an 8.1% rental yield. Jesus, that's high for the units, isn't it? Glendalough with 8%, Balgo with 8%, Hamilton Hill 7.8%, and then we're going Bayswater 7.7%, Beckenham 7.5%, down to 7.4% with Spearwood, Belmont, Midland, and Wembley in that mix. So varying here in the top 10 from 7.4 to 8.1, very solid. And you have to think that that's a strong indicator that there's going to be further, much bigger price rises to revert back that rental yield to the longer term averages in each area. Now, some of my observations, very strong year of median rental price growth. We've gone from $575 per week to $650 per week. So we've had a 13% increase in the median house rent. There's signs, though, from our property management team and from REWA that the rental market is beginning to moderate, with prices remaining stable since March. And the number of rental listings has actually slowly been increasing since February, with properties taking longer to lease, in particular areas especially where there's a lot more investors buying or in the higher ends of the rental market. So the general perception is that, rents are out of control and, there's still massive turnouts, but we're actually finding that, in areas where there's lots of investors buying, it's becoming a lot more difficult to rent properties. We're having to go through our hard to rent checklist. We're having to make sure we're the best price property in that area. Still strong rental prices, but just before we were setting prices that were, very ambitious over and above what had recently leased, and then we were probably still getting more. Now we have to be, best priced on the market in some of these areas. Otherwise, we're not going to get the attention with how many rental properties that there are on. And this time last year, all the top 10 suburbs for houses actually had yields over 6%. So only the top 3 this year have a yield over 6%. So the yield is starting to reduce compared to last year as prices are increasing. Last financial year, the top performing suburb for units had a yield of 9.6%. That is crazy. So this year, the highest yield was 8.1%. So we've already had a bit of price increase and decrease on yield over the last year. And that said, the top 10 houses and units still offer some really strong on yields, don't they? They're between 5 to 8%. When you look around Australia, the pitiful yields that I'm getting on my property in Brisbane and Melbourne, God, it's, Perth still represents such strong and good returns, which is why investors are still favouring us here. So a few final notes as I round things out. Got to be very careful that you don't get analysis paralysis when you're looking through all this data and you use it to inform the taking of action. Many people just get lost in it, make it, feel completely overwhelmed by it. And that's why it helps to have someone that can actually interpret it and use it to make decisions and actually take action and move forward on stuff. And I wanted to make a quick note of how we actually go about our suburb selection, because I've alluded to some of the ways we use data in this. I've developed an exclusive trifecta criteria where I ensure that the suburb, the area, and the property all stack up, and that's the trifecta. I use evidence-based selection of the suburb. So we're looking at areas that have outperformed over the last 30 years and still have the same desirability factors existing that are going to carry forward and see growth into the future. And now I also mentioned that I look at how it's performed over the last 10 years. And if it's had really high growth, I'm ruling out areas that are seeming overpriced, and I'm favouring areas that are seeming undervalued. And I also then overlay prediction algorithms, and I use a tool called HTAG, and that's where I look at what is predicted to occur over the next 1 year. So that's going to, they use all of their AI and machine learning algorithms to come up with a prediction, and that really helps inform our choice of suburb too, because I want it to perform not just over the next year, but also over the longer term. So combining all those things together is going to give us the best chance of really optimum suburb selection. And then when we're starting to look at specific properties, we check out the area around the property. What is the drivers or detractors that exist in that location? What are the school catchments? Is there any Homes West housing? What's the street presentation like? Is there any other sort of external factors that are going to drag the price down, such as HV power lines or negative other attributes? Also make sure that it's not in a flood-prone area or a bushfire-prone area or a flight path. We've really built out and added to our criteria over the last year to make our trifecta criteria even better. You would have gathered from listening to me that I'm all about continuous improvement and having a system that I used that I can keep optimizing and improving. So our criteria has really become very comprehensive, and we're making such better suburb area and property selections for people. So that's only going to result in better returns. And when we look at the specific property, I look back at how the individual properties performed in the past. I calculate its average annual growth rate, and I make sure it's above the suburb growth rate over the same time period. And then we look at the specific location, the neighbours, what factors will appeal or detract from the rentability and its future resale. Look at those positives and negatives. And then we appraise the likely market value for the property and the rental value. And if seriously looking to buy, I cross-check this price with other agents and to see what is under offer in the area. And if we're buying in the area, we know this anyway. So this is going to help inform what price is too much to pay for something. And all of this is what we call our trifecta criteria. It makes it really simple to decide whether something stacks up or not. And you don't need to be an investing expert, which is fabulous when we're working with buyers on our buyer's agency side, because usually one buyer is the expert out of the two. The other one's just along for the ride, but they want to be involved in decisions, and we want to make it simple and straightforward for everyone to see, does this stack up or does this not? And we don't even usually present properties that don't stack up. So we eliminate them at the earlier stages when we're getting into the suburb. We don't go in those suburbs, we don't go in those areas, and then if things come up in the inspection, we might eliminate it then as well. So finally, how can we help you? Do you have a clear plan? If you don't have a strategic plan, get in touch with us through the website. I can put all of my experience to work, combining with our game plan software to really help you get a clear plan on the most optimal way to create wealth into the future. Have you thought about using a buyer's agent? Get in touch with us. We're experts, boots on the ground in Perth, and we have our trifecta criteria, all of our research that backs what we do, as well as our local experience with buying, selling, and renting properties. So if you've found a property, get in touch for us for property management. We're one of the most highly awarded and rated property managers in Australia, and we're absolute specialists in that space. So check out our website for all of those 3 things, and I look forward to hearing from you if you think we can help. Hope this has been useful, and catch you on the next one.
Just a reminder, the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. As we don't know your specific situation, you should always seek professional advice before taking any action. For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my property investor update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. I'll see you in the group.